Marcus Ellison was not just any businessman. He was a man who had built his life from the ground up, starting with very little and turning it into something extraordinary. Born in a small town where opportunities were rare, Marcus grew up learning the value of hard work from his parents. His mother worked long hours as a nurse, and his father ran a small repair shop. They didn't have much money. They gave Marcus something far more valuable: the belief that he could achieve anything if he stayed honest, worked hard, and never gave up. From a young age, Marcus showed a sharp mind and a curiosity for how things worked. While other kids were busy playing, Marcus would often be seen reading books on business and technology. By the time he was in high school, he was already finding ways to make money, fixing old computers, tutoring classmates, and even selling handmade phone accessories. His friends admired his determination, though many didn't fully understand it. After high school, Marcus earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. It was there that he faced his first real taste of discrimination. Some professors doubted his abilities, and some classmates treated him differently because of his race. But Marcus never let that slow him down. In fact, it fueled his ambition. He worked harder, studied longer, and built connections with people who valued him for his skills, not his skin color. By the time he graduated, Marcus already had a job offer from one of the biggest tech companies in the country. He climbed the corporate ladder quickly, thanks to his ability to solve problems, lead teams, and inspire others. But after a few years, Marcus realized he didn't want to spend his life working for someone else. He wanted to create something of his own, a company that would not only succeed, but would also open doors for others like him. Starting his own business wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, failed projects, and moments when Marcus wondered if he had made a mistake. But he refused to quit. He poured all his savings into the business and slowly built a small team of talented people who shared his vision. Together, they worked tirelessly, sometimes in a tiny rented office, sometimes from their own living rooms. Then came the big break. Marcus's company developed a software product that revolutionized the way businesses handled online transactions. It was fast, secure, and easy to use. Within months, major corporations started using it. Contracts poured in, and revenue skyrocketed. Marcus had gone from struggling entrepreneur to one of the most respected CEOs in the tech world. Despite his success, Marcus remained humble. He didn't flaunt his wealth or seek the spotlight. Instead, he invested in community projects, funded scholarships, and mentored young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. He believed success meant nothing if you didn't lift others up along the way. But Marcus's achievements also made him a target for envy and prejudice. Even as a powerful CEO, he still encountered moments where people judged him unfairly. He knew that being a black man in a position of authority meant he had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously. Yet he never allowed bitterness to take root. He faced challenges with grace and believed in setting an example through calm but firm action. It was during one of his busiest business trips that the story of the first-class flight began. Marcus had just finished closing a major deal overseas, securing millions in contracts for his company. Tired but satisfied, he boarded the plane, ready to enjoy a few hours of rest in first class. He had paid for the ticket himself, a reward for his hard work and an opportunity to relax before diving into his next project. For Marcus, traveling first class wasn't about showing off. It was about valuing his time and comfort. He had spent years flying economy during the early days of his career, squeezed between strangers, working on his laptop in cramped spaces. Now, after everything he had achieved, he allowed himself these small luxuries. Little did he know, this flight would become one of the most unforgettable moments of his life, and not for the reasons he expected. He settled into his seat, greeted the crew politely, and took out his tablet to review notes for an upcoming board meeting. Everything seemed normal. The cabin was quiet, the lights were dim, and the air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and warm bread from the galley. Marcus looked forward to the meal service, a gourmet dish he had chosen while booking the ticket. For him, this was part of the travel experience, a small comfort after days of hard negotiations and long hours. Marcus had no idea that a simple request for his meal would soon turn into a moment that tested not only his patience, but also his beliefs about fairness and respect. The meal service began quietly. A soft clinking of cutlery came from the galley as the smell of roasted meat and freshly baked bread filled the cabin. Marcus looked forward to this part of the flight, not because he was hungry, but because it was one of those rare moments when he could slow down, put away his work, and just enjoy the experience. The menu had promised a tender steak, cooked to perfection, paired with creamy mashed potatoes and fresh vegetables. It was exactly the kind of comfort food he needed after days of constant meetings and hotel room dinners. A flight attendant approached Marcus's row, serving the passengers in front of him with practiced smiles and polite words. Marcus noticed they received the same steak entree he had selected when booking. He smiled, assuming his turn would come next. When the attendant finally reached his seat, Marcus greeted her warmly. "Good evening. I believe I ordered the steak." "Please." Her smile flickered for the briefest second before she replied, "I'm sorry, sir. We've run out of the steak entree. I can offer you the vegetarian pasta instead." Marcus blinked in surprise. It didn't make sense. He had pre-selected his meal days ago. First-class passengers usually had their orders prioritized. But he stayed calm and asked politely, "That's strange. I saw you serve the steak to the last passenger." "Are there no more left?" The attendant avoided eye contact and repeated, "Unfortunately, no more are available." Marcus glanced past her. The galley door was still open, and he could clearly see two covered plates on the counter, the same plates he had just seen delivered to others. His confusion began to stir into suspicion. Before he could speak again, the attendant quickly handed him a tray with the pasta and moved on. Marcus stared at it. The pasta wasn't bad-looking, but it was not what he had requested, and certainly not what he had paid for. It wasn't about the food, it was about the principle. He tried to brush it off. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. But as the minutes passed, Marcus noticed something unsettling. Every single passenger in his section, all of whom were white, had received their chosen meal. He was the only one who had been told it's unavailable. Marcus's mind worked quickly. This wasn't the first time he had been treated differently in a subtle but undeniable way. In his position as a CEO, he had faced everything from overt prejudice to quiet, polite dismissals that made it clear he wasn't being seen as an equal. It was always wrapped in a smile, always framed as just a misunderstanding. Still, Marcus wasn't the type to jump to conclusions without proof. He decided to watch closely. Over the next half hour, he observed how the crew interacted with other passengers, the warmth in their tone, the extra attention they gave. When one passenger asked for a second serving of bread, the attendant rushed to bring it. When another requested an extra drink, it arrived within minutes. Marcus's own requests for a glass of sparkling water and later for dessert were met with slow, dismissive responses. The more he watched, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't about availability. This was about treatment, he remembered. Something his father had once told him. "Son, you don't have to fight every battle. But when you do choose to fight, make sure you win." Marcus leaned back in his seat, his expression calm, but his mind sharp. If the crew thought they could treat him differently and it would go unnoticed, they'd chosen the wrong passenger. He decided then and there that he would not cause a scene mid-flight that would only create chaos and give the wrong impression. Instead, he would remain observant, gather information, and deal with it in a way that would leave no room for excuses. What Marcus didn't know was that this quiet decision, made thousands of feet above the ground, was about to set the stage for an explosive outcome after landing one that no one on that flight, crew, or passenger would ever forget. Marcus sat still, his hands resting lightly on the armrest, his expression calm, almost too calm. Inside, however, his mind was already in motion. Years of running a company had trained him to spot patterns, read body language, and notice the details most people overlooked. This wasn't just about a missed meal anymore. It was about principle, respect, and truth. He decided not to react impulsively. Instead, he began quietly observing the crew with the same attention he used in high-stakes negotiations. Every movement, every word, every glance mattered. He watched the lead attendant, the same one who had denied him the steak, chat warmly with another passenger just a few seats away. She leaned in, laughed at his jokes, and even offered him an extra dessert on the house. Moments later, she passed Marcus's row without so much as a glance. Marcus took out his phone, pretending to check emails, but in reality, he opened his notes app. He started recording timestamps, when meals were served, to whom they were served, and what was said. He wasn't making accusations yet. He was building a record. His company's legal team often said, "If you don't write it down, it didn't happen." Marcus knew the value of a solid, detailed account. As the flight continued, the patterns became undeniable. Another passenger requested a last-minute meal change, switching from chicken to steak, and was accommodated without hesitation. Marcus noted the exact time. He also noticed how the crew's tone shifted depending on who they spoke to. Warm and attentive with some, curt and mechanical with others. He kept his demeanor friendly, even smiling when a crew member finally brought him sparkling water after a 20-minute wait. But every polite nod hid the fact that Marcus was slowly piecing together a puzzle, one he planned to reveal at the perfect time. At one point, a fellow passenger, a middle-aged woman in a seat across the aisle, leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "I saw what happened earlier. I don't understand why they said there was no steak left. I got mine after you were served." Marcus met her eyes and gave a small nod of thanks. That small confirmation was all he needed to know. He wasn't imagining things. He didn't ask her for more details. He didn't want to drag other passengers into the matter mid-flight. This wasn't about making a public scene. It was about handling things with precision and control. Marcus knew that once he landed, he would have all the tools he needed to address the situation and ensure there were real consequences. Meanwhile, he noticed something else. The crew's behavior toward him seemed to grow colder the more he stayed quiet. They likely expected him to complain immediately, to cause a scene that could be dismissed as overreacting. When he didn't take the bait, it unsettled them. Marcus had seen this tactic before, in boardrooms, in negotiations, and sometimes even in media interviews. When someone remains calm and strategic, it's far more dangerous than anger. At cruising altitude, the lights dimmed for the rest period. Marcus leaned back, but his thoughts stayed sharp. He reflected on the irony. He was a first-class passenger, the CEO of a global company, and yet here he was, being treated as though he was invisible. He thought about the countless others who might experience similar treatment, but didn't have the platform, power, or resources to challenge it. That thought alone hardened his resolve as the hours passed and the plane cut silently through the night sky. Marcus had already made up his mind. He wouldn't be speaking to the crew again. The next conversation about this incident would happen on the ground, and it wouldn't be a casual chat. It would be with the people who could make decisions that mattered. When the captain announced the descent, Marcus closed his tablet, gathered his belongings, and sat up straight. Outwardly, he appeared relaxed, just another passenger ready to disembark. Inside, he was ready for the moment that would change everything for the people, who thought they could quietly humiliate him without consequence. They had no idea who They were dealing with ... the plane touched down smoothly, the wheels kissing the runway with a soft thud. As the engines roared into reverse thrust, Marcus felt a strange mix of calm and purpose. This wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. He had waited for this moment, with the patience of a chess master lining up his final move. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers stood, stretching and pulling down their luggage from the overhead bins. Flight attendants began their usual cheerful goodbyes, their smiles perfectly rehearsed. Marcus remained seated, his leather briefcase resting neatly on his lap, his eyes following every movement of the lead attendant who had denied him his meal. She laughed easily with a departing passenger, her voice warm, her tone professional, as if nothing had happened. Marcus didn't speak to her. Not yet. Instead, he waited until the crowd in his row thinned, letting the others leave ahead of him. He didn't want to discuss this in the cramped aisle or in front of curious strangers. This conversation would happen where it mattered, in the presence of people with real authority, as he stepped out of the cabin and into the jet bridge. A member of the airline's ground operations team waited to greet him. It was standard protocol for certain VIP passengers and Marcus. As the CEO of a company that held a multi-million-dollar corporate travel contract with this airline, was certainly on their list. "Mr. Ellison, welcome back," the operations manager said warmly. "I hope your flight was comfortable." Marcus gave a polite nod. It was educational. His tone was calm, but the words carried a quiet weight that made the manager tilt her head slightly. Sensing something beneath the surface, he gestured for her to follow him into a nearby private lounge. Once inside, away from the bustle of passengers, Marcus placed his briefcase on the table, opened it, and took out his tablet. With the precision of a man who had been preparing for this all night, he brought up his notes, every timestamp, every observation, even a few discreet photos showing the steak entrees being served after he was told they had run out. The operations manager's smile faded. "Mr. Ellison, this is very serious." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his voice steady. "It's not just serious, it's unacceptable. I paid for a service, and I was denied it while watching others receive exactly what I had ordered. And given the pattern of behavior I witnessed throughout the flight, I have reason to believe this was not a simple mistake." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word was measured, deliberate, and final. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a formal account, backed by evidence. "I want this documented," Marcus continued. "And I want to speak directly to your senior management before I leave this airport. Today, the operations manager, now visibly tense, made a quick call. Within minutes, 2 senior executives from the airline's local headquarters arrived. They knew Marcus by reputation, not just as a high-value client, but as a man whose company's partnership brought the airline millions in yearly revenue. Marcus repeated his account for them, showing the same calm composure. He didn't embellish or dramatize. He simply laid out the facts, piece by piece, until there was no room for denial. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what this meant. One of them tried to apologize, promising an internal review. Marcus stopped him. "With all due respect, this isn't about a review. This is about accountability. Your crew treats a paying first-class passenger like this. Imagine how they treat passengers who don't have the means to challenge them. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for change." The room was silent for a moment. Then, one executive leaned forward, his voice low. "Mr. Ellison, I think we understand the gravity of this situation. You have my word that it will be addressed immediately." Marcus gave a small nod, gathered his things, and stood. "Good, because I'll be following up, and I'll make my decision about future corporate contracts based on how you handle this." As he walked out of the lounge, Marcus didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew that by the end of the day, the airline would be making phone calls that no crew member ever wanted to receive. What none of them realized yet was just how swift and decisive those calls would be. The moment Marcus left the private lounge, the atmosphere inside shifted like a sudden change in air pressure. The two senior airline executives remained seated, staring at the tablet on the table as if it were a ticking time bomb. They didn't speak for several seconds, so both were weighing the exact magnitude of the situation. Finally, the operations manager broke the silence. "That man's company," she began cautiously, "is one of our biggest corporate partners. If this goes public," the older of the two executives raised his hand sharply. "If this goes public, we're finished." The optics alone would destroy months of positive PR. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as though the walls themselves might be listening. "We're talking about a black CEO being denied service he paid for. In first class, with clear signs of discriminatory behavior from our own crew. This isn't just bad service. This is a nightmare." The younger executive flipped through Marcus's notes and images again. Every detail was there: timestamps, visible proof, even corroboration from another passenger. There was no wiggle room, no way to twist this into a harmless misunderstanding. It was a complete, undeniable breach of policy, and worse, it carried the shadow of racial bias. They knew Marcus wasn't bluffing. His calm demeanor, his precision in gathering evidence at all pointed to a man who could destroy them in the court of public opinion without raising his voice. And if he decided to pull his company's travel contracts, they stood to lose millions overnight. The decision was made without any formal vote. The older executive stood up, buttoning his jacket. "We deal with this today, before he leaves this airport." He turned to the operations manager. "Get the crew into a meeting room now." Within minutes, a flight's entire crew, still chatting casually among themselves after the passengers had disembarked, received terse messages over their radios. "Report to the operations conference room immediately." Confused, they gathered in the small, sterile meeting space near the staff offices. Some were still smiling, thinking it was a routine debrief. Others sensed the sudden tension in the air. The lead attendant glanced around nervously as the two executives entered, accompanied by a silent HR manager with a closed laptop. The older executive didn't waste time. His voice was cold and precise. "We've just been given a full account of the service on your last flight. We have evidence that a first-class passenger, a valued corporate client, was denied the meal he pre-ordered, while others received theirs without issue. We have additional reports of inconsistent service, delayed responses to his requests, and an overall pattern of differential treatment." The lead attendant opened her mouth, but the younger executive cut her off. "Don't bother. We've reviewed the documentation. We've also spoken with a passenger who confirmed what he experienced. This isn't an argument, it's a conclusion." The HR manager opened her laptop, her face expressionless. "Effective immediately, your employment with this airline is terminated. You will surrender your ID badges and uniforms before leaving this building." The words hung in the air like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. The crew members looked stunned, glancing at one another as if waiting for someone to protest. The lead attendant tried to speak again, her voice trembling. I didn't," but the older executive didn't let her finish. "You treated a paying first-class passenger, who also happens to be one of our most influential corporate clients, with blatant disrespect. Whether it was conscious or unconscious, it violates every standard this airline stands for, and it will not be tolerated." One by one, the crew surrendered their IDs. The room was silent, except for the faint click of the HR manager's keyboard as she processed their terminations. Outside, Marcus was already walking toward his car, unaware that his calm but calculated response had just ended careers in less than an hour. He didn't need to see it. He trusted that the message had been delivered not just to those who wronged him, but to the entire airline industry. This wasn't about revenge. It was about setting a precedent. And Marcus knew that, somewhere down the line, another passenger would benefit from the stand he took that day. Asterisk, asterisk, by the time Marcus arrived at his hotel later that evening, he considered the incident over, at least on his end. He had handled it quietly, professionally, and with finality. The airline had promised swift action, and Marcus was confident they understood the stakes. He intended to sleep, attend his meetings the next morning, and move forward. But the world had other plans that as he unpacked his suitcase, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from an old friend. "Marcus, is this you?" Attached was a screenshot of a social media post. It wasn't from Marcus. He hadn't said a word publicly, but from the woman across the aisle on the flight. The same passenger who had whispered to him that she saw what happened. Her post was blunt and powerful. "I just witnessed something disturbing on my first-class flight today. A black CEO sitting across from me was refused the meal he ordered, even though others, myself included, got the same one. It was obvious, it was wrong, and it was handled with such grace by him. I hope the airline makes it right." She hadn't named Marcus, but her description, the flight number, and the details were enough for the internet to start piecing it together. Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times, with comments pouring in from people around the world. Some were outraged, others demanded the airline release a statement, and a few claimed they weren't surprised at all that similar things had happened to them. Hashtags began appearing. Hashtag first class bias. Hashtag flying while black. Hashtag justice for CEO. They climbed the trending list so quickly that by midnight, major news outlets were taking notice. The first article appeared online with the headline, "Passenger alleges racial discrimination on luxury. Flight airline yet to respond." By morning, it was on 3 more major news sites, all using the passenger's account and adding, "Sources say the passenger in question is Marcus Ellison, CEO of Ellison Tech." Marcus woke up to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing, texts from friends, emails from journalists, notifications from people tagging him on social media. His PR director had already called twice, leaving urgent voicemails. "Marcus, this is going viral. We need to decide how we're responding before the narrative runs away from us." Across the city, in the airline's corporate headquarters, the crisis management team was scrambling. Their executives had thought firing the crew quietly would contain the problem. But now they were watching the story spread like wildfire. The internet wasn't interested in corporate statements. They wanted public accountability, and they wanted it now. Some commenters demanded to know if Marcus would sue. Others called for boycotts. Influential figures began weighing in, sharing the story as an example of why systemic bias still needed to be confronted, even in places that prided themselves on luxury and world-class service. For Marcus, it was strange. He hadn't sought the spotlight on the ski, had handled the matter for himself, privately. But now, it was no longer just his story. It had become a symbol, one that thousands of people were rallying around. He sat at the edge of his bed, scrolling through the reactions. Some of the messages were heartbreaking, stories from people who had faced similar treatment, but never had the power or platform to do anything about it. Others were encouraging, praising him for keeping his composure and refusing to play into stereotypes. It dawned on him that maybe this incident wasn't supposed to stay private. Maybe it was meant to be a spark, a chance to use his influence not just to protect his own dignity, but to stand for everyone who had been quietly disrespected and dismissed. Somewhere, deep down, Marcus knew this was the turning point. The private battle he had fought in the cabin was now a public war of ideas, and whether he liked it or not, he was at the center of it. By the afternoon, the noise had reached a point where Marcus could no longer ignore it. The story was everywhere, trending on social media, filling the comment sections of news articles, even discussed on morning talk shows. Some headlines exaggerated the details, others stuck to the facts. But the theme was the same. A successful black CEO was allegedly denied service on a first-class flight. And the world wants answers. Marcus sat in his home office, sunlight streaming. In through the large windows, the city skyline in the distance. His phone was on silent, but it didn't matter. Messages still stacked up in his notifications like an endless waterfall. His PR director, Jasmine, sat across from him with her laptop open. Tracking the coverage. "They're all waiting for you to speak," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "If you don't, the conversation will run without you. And when that happens, someone else will define the story." Marcus leaned back in his chair. He wasn't afraid of speaking publicly. In fact, he had done so countless times as a business leader. But this was different. This wasn't a product launch or a keynote speech. This was personal. And yet, it was bigger than him. He turned to Jasmine. "If we do this, we're not just talking about what happened to me. We're talking about what happens to thousands of people every day who don't have the voice or platform to be heard." Jasmine nodded. "Exactly. This can't sound like revenge. It has to sound like leadership." Marcus thought for a moment, then began speaking slowly, the words forming naturally, not as a script, but as truth. "I was refused a meal I had ordered and paid for, while others around me received it without issue. That may seem small to some, but the treatment went beyond the meal. It was about respect, or the lack of it. And I know my experience isn't unique. I've seen it, I've heard the stories, and now I've lived it again, sharing this. Because silence has never fixed a problem." Jasmine typed quickly, shaping his words into a statement that was sharp yet unshakably composed. They decided to post it directly from Marcus's personal account. No corporate logos, no PR spin. Just him. An hour later, the statement went live. "This week, on a first-class flight, I was denied the meal I had pre-selected and paid for, while others were served without issue. The details go beyond the food. It was about how I was treated. And why. I've faced these moments before, but I know too many people deal with them without the means to challenge them. I won't stay silent." Every customer deserves dignity, no matter where they sit, what they look like, or who they are. Within minutes, the post began to explode. Thousands of likes, shares, and comments poured in. Prominent voices, journalists, activists, CEOs, and celebrities amplified it. "This isn't just about a steak," one influential writer tweeted. "It's about respect, bias, and accountability in every industry." Marcus's calm, deliberate tone struck a chord. He hadn't called for boycotts or thrown insults. He had simply told the truth, and the truth, spoken with clarity and authority, was powerful enough to rally people without shouting. By evening, major networks requested live interviews. Late-night talk show hosts mentioned the story in their monologues. Hashtags like #DignityInTheAir and #EllisonSpeaks emerged alongside the original ones, giving the movement a name and a leader. Inside the airline's headquarters, executives watched with growing unease. Firing the crew had been meant to end the problem, but Marcus's statement had transformed it into something much larger. It was no longer just a PR issue. It was now a cultural moment. Marcus knew the story had entered a new phase. It was no longer about what happened in Seat 2A. It was about a question that reached far beyond the cabin of an airplane. How do we treat each other when no one is watching? ****. The following morning, the airline's boardroom felt like a pressure cooker. Every executive was on edge, the room heavy with the weight of the previous night's headlines. Overnight, Marcus's statement had been replayed on every major news network. Public sentiment wasn't just against the crew, It was turning against the airline itself. Calls for transparency, accountability, and systemic change were echoing. Across social media and in op-ed columns, the CEO of the airline, a man who had built his reputation on luxury branding and flawless customer experience, now sat at the head of the table with a jaw clenched tight. "We can't wait this out," he said, his voice low but commanding. "This is no longer just about one incident. This is about who we are as a company and whether the public believes that image." The PR director laid out the numbers. Millions of social media impressions, multiple trending hashtags, and a 12% dip in stock value within 24 hours. "We need to address this directly," she said. "And it can't be one of those cold, scripted apologies. It needs to be human, transparent, and actionable." By mid-morning, the airline released an official statement. But it wasn't just a few paragraphs buried on their website. This time, it was front and center, emailed to every customer, posted on every platform, and read aloud by the CEO himself in a video. "We acknowledge that a passenger, Mr. Marcus Ellison, experienced service on our flight that was unacceptable and inconsistent with our values. We have conducted an immediate investigation, and as a result, the crew members involved are no longer employed with our airline. We are deeply sorry for the disrespect shown to Mr. Ellison and for the harm this caused to the broader community. Effective immediately, we are implementing mandatory bias awareness and cultural sensitivity training for all employees, as well as a new passenger service review system to ensure this never happens again." The statement was direct. It named Marcus. It confirmed the firings. And, most importantly, it promised real change. Marcus read the statement from his office later that day. He wasn't surprised they had acted so publicly. The pressure had left them no choice. But what struck him was the tone. It wasn't just damage control. It sounded like the start of a shift, one that could ripple far beyond this one incident. His assistant walked in holding a stack of letters and printed emails. "These have been coming in all morning," she said, "from people thanking you. Some are from passengers. Some are from airline staff. A few even from employees at other companies saying you've inspired their leadership to take action." Marcus flipped through them, reading snippets. "I had a similar experience, but never spoke up. Thank you for showing it's possible. Because of your stand, my company is reviewing how we handle customer complaints. You didn't just win for yourself, you won for all of us." Later that week, Marcus accepted an invitation to speak at a major business ethics conference. His talk wasn't about the airline or even about the stake. It was about dignity, leadership, and the responsibility that comes with influence. Sometimes, he told the packed room, we think changing the world means doing something grand and complicated. But often, it starts with standing up in the moments when it would be easier to sit quietly. What happened to me could have been ignored, but ignoring it would have meant letting it happen again to someone who might not have the means to fight back. Leadership isn't just about making big deals. It's about making sure that when you see wrong, you don't let it pass as normal. The audience rose to their feet in applause. The moment was no longer about a single flight, a single company, or a single CEO. It had become a story of how one person's quiet, firm stand could set in motion a chain of events that forced a powerful institution to change its ways. Weeks later, other airlines announced similar training initiatives. Travel blogs began publishing lists of companies taking bias seriously. The phrase #dignity in the air lived on, not just as a hashtag, but as a standard. As for Marcus, he returned to his work, never chasing the fame that had sprung up around him. He hadn't asked to be the center of the story, but since it found him, he made sure it ended in a way that meant something. Not just for him, but for everyone who believed that respect isn't a privilege, it's a right.